Hello and welcome to this very special coverage. The 55th GST Council meeting has concluded. The Council deferred talks on tax cuts for insurance and food delivery charges on the issue of bringing ATF under the GST ambit. We understand it was discussed, but there was no consensus. The Council also issued a clarification on the taxability of popcorn, saying that ready-to-eat popcorn would be taxed at 5%, pre-packaged popcorn would be subject to a 12% GST, and caramel popcorn will attract an 18% GST. We're now joined by a few experts, former IRDAI member Nilesh Sathe, Prateek Jain, partner at PwC India, MS Money, partner GST, Deloitte India are joining us on the show. Let me go across to Nilesh Sathe first. Nilesh, there was a lot of hope that this GST Council meeting may finally go ahead and reduce the GST on insurance premiums for senior citizens, for health insurance. Why do you think this got deferred? Some of the states have said that more inputs will be sought from IRDAI. Why do you think this was a difficult decision, and why were there differences among states?
No, basically it is going to have revenue loss for the states. And any loss, they want to assess it properly, the extent to which the loss will be there on account of revenue. And that is probably the reason why they have deferred it. But then what is important is whether you really consider insurance as a necessity. And from that point of view, I think even if there is revenue loss or a substantial revenue loss, I will say, still it is advisable that the consumers get benefit of reduced tax rates on insurance. It was proposed that on term insurance and health insurance, it will be reduced to zero. And maybe for 60 plus on any amount beyond 5 lakhs on health insurance. But then that has not happened. It's disheartening that the consensus was not established. Effort should be made to do that. A lot of homework is required to be done. Probably that was not done by DFS or whatever, whosoever was responsible for that. And I was surprised that West Bengal government, which initially supported the reduction of GST on insurance, has now sought for certain additional clarification. This is what is informed. So what is important is it has to be reduced. Now the question is when. And so long as a decision is not taken, it is going to impact the life insurance and health insurance industry badly, because people are waiting for its reduction. So they are not coming forward for new business. So this is not a good sign. Whatever decision you want to take, you should take quickly and not keep on deferring it. But then it appears that now it will only in the next financial year. Effective date will be next financial year. So let us wait and see, because we can't do anything. We are helpless. Consumers are always helpless.
Yeah. Right. Do you have any hope? And as you said, more work should have been done prior to this meeting. And we're actually seeing this with a lot of decisions that the GOM report, for example, on rate rationalization was not submitted. On insurance, now inputs have to be sought from IRDAI. All this could have been done earlier. So are you hopeful that in the next few years, possibly by the next meeting, we could have a decision?
Should be. Because if at all not now, then when? Because this has been talked about for a long time. And it's not so difficult to arrive at these figures. They are all available in the public domain. So why is it that they should take longer time for compiling these figures and submitting? The problem probably appears to be even the insurance companies, because if it is reduced to zero, they will lose the input tax credit, which they are now getting. But then taking that input tax credit into account, what is the net revenue loss to the state government should have been worked out in advance. Why it was not done, I don't know.
Right. So clearly more work needs to be done, and possibly more consensus as well. What do you think, Nilesh?
No, it's always decisions are by consensus. But I don't think it is difficult to get consensus on this, because right from the cabinet minister, Mr. Nitin Gadkari, everybody is advocating that since it is a necessity of life, there is no justification for charging GST, and that too at such a high rate of 18%. We are not charging it on other necessities of life, like food grains and others. So why is it that it should be charged? And moreover, this is the responsibility of the state and central government to provide for health insurance. They are not doing that properly. And that is the reason why people have to buy health insurance. And when they are buying from their own pocket, it is absolutely disheartening to find that it is being charged at 18% when they are paying premium from their own pocket. So government is unnecessarily trying to make money out of it, which they should not. This is my frank opinion on this.
Completely get your view there, and we'll come back to you, sir, in just a bit. Let me also go across to our other guests who are joining us. Prateek Jain, partner at PwC India. He's with us. MS Money from partner GST at Deloitte. MS Money, what's your sense of this GST meeting? There have been a few decisions. For example, clarification on GST on taxation on popcorn, fortified rice kernels, autoclaved aerated concrete blocks, GST on sale of old cars, including EVs. How do you see some of these decisions and the immediate impact?
Okay, so look, there is a larger perspective to the GST Council, meeting, and some of the products that you mentioned, would have been debated in detail. And in every GST Council meeting, we have been seeing some changes being made in terms of the rates for specific products. These come out of a larger consultation process, which is very, very good from a fiscal policy perspective. But to my mind, the issue that everybody was expecting and businesses were expecting was in respect of insurance. And on insurance, there is a much wider aspect to be considered. Look, in respect of goods, we have always had a category called essential goods, necessary supplies, etc. from the beginning of GST in 2017. And those have always been taxed at 5%. When it comes to services, somehow this concept of essential services as a concept has not been enshrined too much in GST. It's quite possible that this happened because GST took over from service tax, where again, this concept was not enshrined. But having completed 7 years in GST, I think it is now necessary to categorize certain services as essential services. We already have restaurant services, which are at 5%. And maybe we now need to have a category defined in the GST schedule itself. Health insurance, for instance, certainly needs to be categorized as an essential service. Term life cover up to certain limits, yes, of course, it's an essential service. And at no point of time is there any debate on whether these are essential services or not. The only debate that has been going on is the mechanics of going ahead with it. This GST Council meeting, we were expecting some clarity to emerge in this. And to that extent, businesses will now need to wait for possibly a month or two more before we have a discussion on insurance. The other products that you mentioned, we were certainly not expecting a decision on, popcorn, but I'm sure that's a decision that is, a good decision because it will impact certain people. On used cars, I just have this perspective that the used car business is largely dominated by consumers who come from the middle income space. And at some point of time, there has been an emphasis on giving relief to those products which are used by people in the middle income phase. And therefore, I'm sure it would have been discussed in detail that when we hike the rate of GST on used cars, whether EVs or whether other cars, it is in some ways going to impact people in the middle income space. They are the people who are the largest buyers.
But I think
this
GST increase on used cars, small used cars and EVs, it is not for individuals. It's not for private individuals. So I'm guessing it's for larger fleet buyers, possibly.
Yeah. So the way I look at it is, even if it is not for individuals, when it is for a larger buyer, the eventual user of a car is an individual. And therefore, finally, being an indirect tax, the cost will get passed on to an individual. And that is the reason why now I don't have data on how big the used car business is and what revenues it is going to garner. But I'm sure all of those would have been considered in detail before they came to this conclusion.
Right. Let me also go across to Prateek Jain. Prateek Jain, now, as far as the inclusion of ATF is concerned, now, this was a question of revenue for a number of states. It was bound to be difficult. Do you feel there is any way consensus can be built around this to include ATF under the GST regime?
No, absolutely. I think many of us have been saying that petroleum products should come under GST over a period of time. To start with, perhaps ATF and natural gas. And there has been a lot of debate about both ATF and natural gas. There is a logic for both, and particularly for ATF, because ATF under the erstwhile regime at least for the commercial airline, you used to get credit because you had service tax on the output and excise duty on the input. But after GST has come in, you don't get that input credit. So there is an incremental cost. And over a period of time, this cost for the airlines have been increasing, and there is a view that the price of flight tickets have also increased, and ATF is one of the main reasons for that. So I think I'm encouraged by the fact that at least the debate is happening on ATF. And while the decision has not been taken now, and some of the decisions are a little more complex now because the compensation now is getting over. Does that mean the states have to kind of find a way to stand on their own feet? And therefore, the states would try and sort of debate that as to how much is the revenue loss and so on. And this decision might take some time. But I hope, and I'm quite sure, rather, that ATF and natural gas should come under GST over, let's say, 1 year or so.
All right. So you're hopeful of this coming around in 1 year or so. We're also joined by Rajat Bose of Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas. Rajat, how do you see some of these decisions that have been taken today impacting the common man and businesses?
Starting with insurance, I think that, of course, is something which the common man was expecting to happen, and that would have definitely helped. Although, giving an exemption upfront may not always be viable because there is also, input credit blockages and all those things which needs to be seen. And that's probably the reason why they would have, deferred this decision to actually see, what exactly will be the impact on the output side. So, it should have been done before this meeting, and those, numbers should have been finalized. But it's better that, a complete sort of exercise is conducted before taking any decision in haste of, reducing the rates and, which might have an effect on the output, on the cost of the service itself, which might go up. So that's on the insurance sector. As far as, ATF is concerned, yes. Again, ATF and natural gas, I completely agree with Pratik. If we can get these to start with within the GST ambit, it is going to help certain businesses, reduce costs as credit would be available. But at the same time, we need to balance out the interest of various states as to how they would be compensated in light of the fact that the compensation sets will be sort of going soon.
All right. Just stay on with us. We request all our panelists to stay with us. The Bihar Deputy Chief Minister Samrat Chaudhary spoke to CNBC TV18 a short while back. Let's listen in.
देखिए, अभी जीएसटी काउंसिल की जो जीओएम की रिपोर्ट देनी थी, उसमें कई लोगों के सुझाव आए कि एक बार और बैठक करके, चाहे ग्रुप इंश्योरेंस हो, इंडिविजुअल इंश्योरेंस हो, सीनियर सिटीजन हो उनके लिए इंश्योरेंस हो, एक और हम लोग बैठक करेंगे, उसके बाद विस्तार से रिपोर्ट अगली बैठक में करेंगे।
और सर, ये रेट रैशनलाइजेशन में भी रिपोर्ट सबमिट नहीं हुई है, क्यों?
ये अगली बैठक में होगा।
अब सर, ये बीमा के ऊपर क्या मतभेद था, मतलब विचार सेम नहीं थे, मतलब देयर वाज लैक ऑफ कंसेंसस?
नहीं, मेरा इतना ही मानना है कि अभी उस पर लोगों ने कहा कि और विचार किए जाए तब आगे।
तो सर, आज एजेंडा क्या
जल्द करेंगे, जल्द जनवरी में करेंगे।
All right. So there was Samrat Chaudhary, the Deputy CM of Bihar, saying that there was definitely a discussion on reduction of GST on health insurance and life insurance premiums. But there was a feeling that there should be at least one more meeting before any kind of decision is taken. Let me go back to our guest once again, also discussing the issue of e-commerce, because reduction of GST on food deliveries was also on the GST Council agenda. Now, a decision on that has been deferred. MS Mani, this was also an important ask of the industry. What were the pros and cons of this, and why do you think this could possibly take more time?
When it comes to e-commerce players and the food delivery, apps, I think the larger issue is the fact that this needs to be clarified at the earliest. And whenever it is clarified, and the clarification that businesses were expecting on this was essentially to say that either there is no GST on the delivery fee, because the delivery fee is passed on by the food delivery app directly to a gig worker. And therefore, to that extent, they don't seem to be providing the service. It's a gig worker who's providing a service. And if at all there is a GST on this, which is, let us say, at 5%, it needs to be done on a prospective basis. What the delay in the decision making is doing is to put the e-commerce players, the food delivery apps, in a bit of a difficulty, because if the decision comes in January or February 25, and the decision is that this is leviable with effect from 1st January 2022, that's when the existing regulations for food delivery apps came into force, it's going to be very difficult for them because this is an indirect tax and they cannot now recover it from the user of the service at that point of time. So to my mind, there are two principles that come out of the recent challenges that the food delivery apps have been, facing. One, it needs to be clarified as soon as there is an issue before notices are issued and before some kind of investigation starts. And if at all something like that is done, it should always be on a prospective basis and never on a retrospective basis. A retrospective indirect tax does not make any kind of sense for business because they cannot go back and recover it from the end user of that particular service.
Right. We have more sound bites from the state ministers coming up. Let's see if we can go across to K.N. Balagopal, Finance Minister of Kerala, and Chandrama Bhattacharya, Finance Minister of West Bengal as well.
Consultation meeting was very good because this was much earlier than generally which we are having. Earlier this discussion happened. So all the demands in detail we states have already gave it. So the demand is with you, no? All the memorandum we gave. So that is it. And for developing every state, and differences of the states are also there because each and every state is different.
Right.
So cooperative federalism is very important. So we are always saying that you have honor the question of equity, and at the same time you have to accept performance.
Okay.
So the balance should be there. So some states are having some kind of more development, some are not developing like that because India is such a vast country. But those who already developed, those who already have some kind of achievements in some particular area, they have to get some benefits. They have to get their due share.
Yeah.
These kind of issues are there.
So,
Right?
two quick questions. What are the expectations from the council meeting tomorrow? And have all states asked for a higher borrowing limit of more than 3.5%?
Tomorrow's GST Council is something different related to the GST, total GST general decision like rates and some fitment committee recommendations. Many things will come. And here this we demanded for some 3.5% that because now it is 3% and plus 0.5% as power related borrowing. And as per the 15th Finance Commission, the power sector reforms, the 0.5% will end by this year. So we are requesting for 1 year more and extension for 1 year. And we are demanding for 0.5% extra, means 3% is the now existing limit. We are requesting for 3.5% because due to COVID and aftermath of COVID situation, the demand of states is there.
Who have suffered and the loss the state government has suffered, center has to come forward and look into it and give us the assistance. Over and above that, our funds for Awas Yojana, 100 days, these have been stopped. So how many teams had come, how many visits they have made, what was the sanction they had given, what was the allotment they had sanctioned, that amount is also not being released. Therefore, that I requested the Honorable Finance Minister to look into this aspect and direct the concerned departments and accordingly release the amounts.
Ma'am, anything on releasing the borrowing limit?
Borrowing limit increase, many other ministers have told, and I also agree with that, and she has already explained that for the power sector it is 0.5% and borrowing limit is 3%. But what she has said is about disaster should be allotting funds to all the states. So that without 50 50 years जो interest free loan है ना, तो वो that interest free loan from that 50% of that will be for the states which will face disasters. So there she has also taken into account the problem I told. And not only me, there are many states who had faced. I had raised the issue.
All right. Now, as far as the report on rate rationalization is concerned, we are given to know that the submission of the report by the GOM on rate rationalization will now take place in the next meeting. Prateek Jain, now this was a very important ask, and it's been going on for the last 2 years, possibly, or even more, that the industry has been seeking a rationalization of rates. How can this process be put on a fast track, according to you? Because there are concerns around it. States have a very different view. Is there any way that we can bring states on board?
I think we can, but a couple of points I want to make. One is that there was a talk about bringing in a new slab of 35% for a couple of products, and it seems that decision on that has been deferred, which is good, because look, the whole objective of rate rationalization was to reduce the number of slabs that you have. So you have 5, 12, 18, and 28. These are the primary 4 slabs. Idea was to reduce these 4 slabs into 3 by possibly looking at merging 5 and 12 into a single category of, let's say, 7-8%, or 12 and 18 into let's say, one category of 15-16%. That really was what was industry hoping for. But the way the rate rationalization perhaps is being worked out at this point in time is to look at, let's say, 100-odd products and seeing that, okay, can we reduce or increase the rates for those products, and including possibly bringing in a new slab of 35%. Now, that perhaps is not in line with what industry would expect, and therefore, I think the larger consensus about bringing that 4-tier structure to a 3-tier structure is something which is needed of the hour. Obviously, one needs to see that it's a revenue neutral exercise, because few products the rate will go up, few products rate will go down. The GST collections over the last 3-4 months have not been as buoyant as the government would expect, and therefore I would expect the decision to take time. But idea should be to bring or merge these 4 into 3 rather than looking at individual items, and except if it's very critical like insurance. But rest all, I think decision perhaps should be taken along with merging of the slabs.
All right. We are going to take a short break at this point, but lots more. We're also waiting for the finance minister to start her press conference. It could happen any time now. We'll be right back, and we'll go across to all our guests. Welcome back. You're watching our coverage of the 55th GST Council meeting, and let's go straight across to Jaisalmer, where this meeting of state finance ministers and the GST Council was taking place. This is a 2-day meeting, and my colleague Sapna Das, who's covering this meeting, caught up with Telangana Finance Minister Bhati Vikramarkar Mallu and asked him about the state's demand on ATF.
Very clear, I told you already.
Sir.
ATF, aviation turbine fuel, is a product of, crude oil production, that is. It comes out of crude oil. And you're all aware all petroleum products are with the state in the VAT. It is not in the GST. So when it came for the discussion, then all the states...
All the states?
Yeah, majority of the states made it to, in the council...
Majority of the states?
In the council, they have discussed and said, the states are not having any other source except few like, petroleum products and state excise, other than the GST. GST, which is under the control of the government of India. So each state is having its own, requirements, problems, geographically their, demands. All those things to cater at least these 2 things, they kept it in the VAT. And now we requested to maintain the status quo, the same like.
All right. So clearly that is a problem when it comes to the industry ask on conclusion of ATF, airline turbine fuel under the GST, and between what the state governments are saying that they have very few sources of revenue and VAT is one of them. And if you take that away, it will be difficult for states to generate revenue. Now, let's go across to all our guests once again. Rajat Bose is joining us. Rajat, now, ahead of the next decision of the GST Council meeting, and whenever the next GST Council meeting takes place, what would be 2 or 3 key agenda points that you hope there would be clarity on by then?
I think one definitely would be on the insurance sectors. I'm hoping that they will come out with more concrete numbers and figures to, to sort of see if it makes sense to reduce the rate of GST on insurance. As far as ATF is concerned, I agree that it is a problem. The states may not be willing to sort of budge from their position that the revenue loss to the states might be a bit too much for them to absorb at this point of time. But at the same time, I think they need to be a bit more creative as to how to compensate the states for that revenue loss. I mean, they can come out with some mechanism where the states, if whatever loss the states are expecting to happen can be made up with some additional levy on the ATF, so that that sort of counterbalances the the problem of revenue loss for the states. So something on those lines can be worked, if it can be worked out before the next GST Council meeting. That would be great. Although yes, if they're saying that it will happen in January, I don't think they have so much of time to figure that out. But still, on a broad level, something like a sort of a blueprint as to how they want to compensate the states, that at least should be discussed in the next council meeting.
All right, so that should at least be discussed. And let me go across to Prateek once again. Prateek, as far as the decisions today are concerned, which are the sectors you see immediately impacted by that, and how would the common man get impacted? We've seen one clarification on popcorn, rice kernels, concrete blocks, on used cars as well. So how is this going to impact the industry?
Look, I think most of the critical decisions seem to have been deferred. Okay, I think on the positive side, not bringing in 35% slab itself is positive, I think, for the consumers, although it was only for a couple of products. Some of these items like popcorn that you spoke about, industry has been paying on a particular category at 12%. Now the view seems to be that it should be 18%. One needs to see whether it is prospective or retrospective. If it is retrospective, there might be an issue. There's already some litigation going on there. On salted popcorn, they are perhaps clarifying as per reports that should be 12%. In many cases, it has been paid at 18% as well. So industry would want to claim a refund, possibly, in case it has not been passed on to the consumers. So really, you'll have to see which products, etc. Today's decision do not perhaps impact the consumers that much. But in January, when the decision is taken on rate rationalization of larger set of products, and the insurance and the delivery charges for food app, etc. I think that is a time when perhaps consumers will be impacted more. But today's decision, perhaps not that big an impact.
All right. So let's also speak about certain demands from certain states, especially with regard to setting up of a GOM to look at funds for disaster management. MS Money, West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh, and we heard the ministers also speak a short while back. They've asked for a GOM to be constituted for this 1% cess levy to manage funds for disaster management. And what do you think will be the importance of this and the possibility going forward?
Look, from a policy perspective, having any kind of cess on top of GST is certainly retrograde. We have to bear in mind that when GST came in, one of the promises that was given to business was that it will be a tax which will not be having additional cesses and surcharges and other taxes imposed on top of it. So there is a tax rate, and that tax rate is the rate that business needs to factor in when they do the pricing, costing, their internal systems and everything. To that extent, the only exception that was made in the past was a compensation cess, and that was a need-based decision, because at that point of time, the states would not have come on board unless they were guaranteed that their revenues were compensated for any shortfall for 5 years. The compensation cess, because of the pandemic, again has been extended till 2026. So to my mind, if it is necessary to fund a disaster, it is necessary to fund any requirement of funds that a state might need for natural calamities, it should be resorted to without tinkering with the overall structure of GST. Because the moment we have something like a 1% cess on top of the GST to fund a specific purpose, that sets a precedent. And then over a period of time, let's say over the next 5 years, 10 years, we have various kinds of cesses added, which makes the tax as complex as it was before. And the intention was to make it a good and simple tax. Therefore, my take would be that while states are within their rights to ask for the center to pick up the tab and compensate them for various natural calamities and disasters, please do it without tinkering with the overall GST architecture, which has acquired some complexity over a period of time. Let's go back to making it a simpler tax and not a more complex tax.
And a complex tax. Okay, that's an important point. And Mr. Sathe, if I were to come back to you again, what consensus do we now need to emerge before the next GST Council meeting on insurance premiums? Now, there are already reactions coming in through the day that, in a way, that this was a missed opportunity. More could have been done. What do you expect by the next meeting, and how can we go about building consensus?
Consensus cannot be built on its own. Somebody has to make efforts to build consensus. And I think it is the role of finance minister to build consensus. And for that, it is necessary that necessary clarifications which are asked for by the respective finance ministers of various states are given well in time. And it's thought over that how it will benefit the economy as such. Because just look at some figures. The insurance sector has contributed to over 25 lakh crores of G6 in central government and over 13 lakh crores in state government securities. Now, ultimately, this money is going for developmental purposes. You should not undermine the importance of insurance sector. And if at all people shy away from going to insurance because of high GST, then where from government will get money for developmental purposes like infrastructure and everything. There's a huge amount. No other financial sector, maybe banks or mutual funds, they contribute such huge amounts of money in government securities. So some sort of favorable treatment needs to be given to insurance sector, and which finance minister ultimately has to ensure that consensus is arrived at. As I said, revenue loss is bound to be there. But then they should be compensated some way or the other, or they should be told that, okay, we are coming out with some other scheme whereby you will get compensation for this revenue loss. So efforts need to be taken. It cannot be automatic. And I think that is the role of finance minister, which he must do.
Right. We have also heard from the Andhra Pradesh finance minister. He spoke to my colleague Sapna Das. Let's listen in to that interview.
That's good. I mean, the way it went ahead was very beautifully. Every agenda was thoroughly debated, discussed, and there was consensus in every part of it.
Including on the insurance sector, the fact has been deferred, and the GM rate rationalization did not take up the report. So can you please elaborate on that?
See, the insurance question, it was for betterment. There were certain concerns still expressed, because it's a simple thing. People wanted to give for a concession for the senior citizens. What if the senior citizens are included in a family? So you can't take a decision right across the table. So for this kind of positive side of it, it was thought it should be debated and discussed.
All right. Let me also get In a soundbite from the Jammu and Kashmir Chief Minister Omar Abdullah, he also spoke to the media after coming out of the meeting. Let's listen in.
Well, our worry was based more on public speculation than on the agenda. There had been a lot of speculation that GST on shawls, particularly Pashmina shawls, was going to be hiked. So we had come prepared to ensure that that wouldn't happen. Thankfully, it wasn't taken up, and we will also ensure that in the future also something like this is not considered, because it would be life-threatening to our Pashmina shawl industry.
All right, let's cut back to Jaisalmer, and the Finance Minister is just about to start her press conference, address the media after a marathon meeting over the last few hours. Remember, she has been there for the last 2 days, meeting finance ministers from different states. So yesterday was the state pre-budget meeting. She was taking into account suggestions from state governments on the budget, and today she's had a marathon meeting on the GST Council agenda. So I think she's just about going to start speaking. There were many items on the agenda. There have been 5 or 6 decisions taken. Some of the decisions have been deferred. Let's listen in.
स्वागत करती हूं। इसके साथ ही मैं माननीय केंद्रीय वित्त मंत्री और कॉर्पोरेट मामलों